Welcome back to Leadership with Darrell W. Gunter. The objective of this show is simple and purposeful to bring forth the ideas, practices, ethics, and morals that leaders must model. Leadership is not a title, it is a behavior, it is a responsibility, it is stewardship. On this program, we explore how accomplished individuals lead in business and academia, in community, and in life so that each of us can elevate our own standard of leadership. Today, I'm welcome and honored to have Mr. Marc Inzelstein, author of the book Essential Leadership Practicing Love, L.O.V.E., in Turbulent Times. Marc challenges many of the traditional assumptions about leadership and argues that leadership is less about authority and strategy and more about who we become as human beings. Marc, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me, Darrell. Appreciate being here with you.
Before we jump into this really fascinating book, can you share with our audience a little bit about yourself and your background?
Absolutely happy to. Well, I see myself as a global citizen. I've been fortunate enough to live around the world and grew up in multiple cultures. I've been in
Mhm.
the U.S. for the last 30 years. I love being here. I love this country. But I grew up in Europe, primarily in France. I also lived in England and in Italy. I'm a dual French-U.S. citizen, and I was born in South Africa, so I have that as well. So I have a, so I guess it's a way of saying that I've been exposed to a lot of cultures, and I love meeting people from different cultures. It's opened my mind over the years to see what humans really are, which is something very unique and very special. And the individuality, the difference is what makes life so beautiful. So that's informed a lot of my approach to what I do is just to look for that, to look for who are you and what's unique about you and understand more about you because everyone's like a snowflake, completely individual. And so I'm fortunate to have had that background to give me that understanding of people.
Wow, very good. So your book begins with one of the most personal stories that I've read in a leadership book, your father's survival during the Holocaust. How did that story ultimately become the foundation for your leadership philosophy?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question, Darrell. It's really a profound story. It's something that's shaped my life. I found out when I was a young child, 5 years old, that my father had survived the Holocaust in Poland. Poland, which is a country where 3 million Jews were killed in the concentration camps or in other ways, and so an entire community that was wiped out, massive community. And it's that story obviously impacted me in a massive way
Mm.
just understanding how he survived as one of the few. There were very few percentage-wise that survived that. So the story itself is full of amazing happenings, which are almost I say mathematically improbable. Um,
Mhm.
but ultimately, it's a story of resilience and it's a story of hope. And what linked that story to me writing this book, Darrell, is the person who my father was, who was a truly loving, generous, warm human being, extremely optimistic and always positive. And you would think that someone that had gone through such trauma and such horror at such a young age could grow up very differently, with a lot of bitterness, a lot of anger, a lot of hatred. And he was exactly the opposite. He was really just a tremendous, very successful in life, very accomplished. He was a senior executive at IBM and then at his own companies. And and he had tons of friends. And he was a loving person, a lovable person. I mean, you wanted to be around because he was always cracking jokes, making you feel good, that kind of thing. And when I asked him one day, I was a little older, and I said, "Well, how are you so positive? How are you so open and loving to everyone, to life?" And he basically said to me, "Look, it's just a choice. That's really the end of the day. It's just a choice."
It's a choice. Wow. How old was your father when he was in the unfortunate Holocaust camps?
He was he was about 5 years old when the war started, and around 11 or 12 when it ended. So it was that those are very formative years, So
Yes, yes.
yeah, so he was definitely it was something that shaped him enormously, gave him incredible strength and resilience. Because once you've been through something like that, the rest of life seems sort of pale in comparison. But at the same time, it did bring him to become a human being who was always choosing. And he never let circumstances dictate his attitude to life.
Right.
And what that led, as an adult, I read a book called Man's Search for Meaning, which was written by a very well-known Austrian psychiatrist by the name of Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl was also a survivor. He was an adult during the Holocaust. And the book, I really recommend that book for everyone to read, just because it's a book about what being human truly means and the resources we have inside of us. And what Frankl taught all of us, because he survived, the worst of the worst in the concentration camps, and he also came out and had a tremendous attitude and wrote this best-selling book, which is it's sold millions and millions of copies. It's one of the best-selling psychiatry books ever, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
His teaching to us was that between the stimulus and response, meaning between the time something happens and the time we respond to it, there is a freedom in that, a freedom of choice for us.
Mm.
And in that freedom lies our possibility for greatness.
Okay.
Because we're not the victim of circumstances. We are at cause in who we choose to become in the face of what's in front of us.
Right.
And a lot of my book is based on that premise, on that space between stimulus and response and the freedom to choose who we become. Because ultimately, like you said in your introduction, leadership is largely an act of becoming.
Mm-hmm.
And I talk a lot about what that means and how we access those deeper parts of us that ultimately are going to make us better people and certainly better leaders.
Interesting. One of the quotes out of your book that your father said to you that was something incredibly simple. We choose how we respond and who we become. How has that statement guided your life?
Well, it's definitely guided my life um, consistently from the time as a child to today. All of us have ups and downs in life. Everyone, all of us. It's just part of the way life works. We have great moments, we have terrible moments, we have everything in between. And in all of those moments, we have that free choice of who am I? Who do I choose to be in the face of
Mm-hmm.
these circumstances? Sometimes circumstances are horrific. Like, if you've been through something like any trauma like the Holocaust, it's something that's almost impossible to understand. Most challenges in life are not at that level, but some of them can be pretty intense. I know for me, I've had a number of these, both in my personal life and my professional life. I've been an entrepreneur my whole career. I've had tremendous successes. I've also had tremendous failures. And I've been at places where I've been like at rock bottom in my entrepreneurial career because it's a risky process. Like many Americans love to be an entrepreneur. There's so many in this country. There was a time in my early 30s where I had this was probably my third company.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I'd been very successful up until then in everything I'd done. I'd had a very successful career in my late 20s in Europe as a consultant, had helped build a very successful organization, and honestly had made a lot of money. And I'd assumed, based on what I'd lived through up until then professionally, that life was just going to be like that, just going to be easy. Success would just follow success, and I never doubted that. When I moved to the US, things took a bit of a turn for me. I had a company at that time. It was a recruiting headhunting company, and I was actually very, very successful in the first couple of years until the US hit a massive economic downturn. And all of a sudden, all of my clients disappeared overnight. That either they went bankrupt, they had no more resources, they stopped hiring people. My specialty at the time was technical people, IT
Mm-hmm.
professionals, and I found myself from one day to the next um, as a newlywed with a young baby on the way, with almost no resources, and feeling a little panicky, honestly. And the panic stayed with me for a little bit, but I knew that there was the ability to choose, and I didn't see a way out immediately, but I decided I was going to invest in myself, and that's when I started. This was decades ago, doing my first training courses on leadership, on management, or personal development. And there was a point in one of these sessions where I was sitting with a couple hundred people in 100 other people in a room, and the instructor was guiding us through some kind of introspection. And there was a moment in that introspection where I really fully internalized and understood viscerally that I was not my circumstances. And at that moment, who I was and who my father had explained to me who he was and how he'd met life, those two points met.
Mm.
And it became a reality for me. I understood. I felt something in me, which was a level of depth, of resource, of resilience that is beyond our thoughts, beyond our conceptions. And
Mm.
it's something you have to touch to experience to know it's real. But that at that moment, my whole future opened up for me. And it's at that point in time where I started on this career, which I've been doing for 25 years now, which is executive advisor, leadership consulting. It was something born out of a moment of insight and that insight meeting opportunity and passion. So that's one of the ways, I guess, we could say how that lesson from my father impacted me.
Wow. So, in your book, you describe today's leadership environment as one of burnout, stress, distraction, and disconnection.
Yeah,
Why do you believe that so many leaders are struggling today?
it's a great question. Um, I think fundamentally, the world has become exceedingly complex.
Mhm.
Things are moving faster and faster. Um, there's this term that we've been using for the last few decades to describe our reality, which is VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. It comes from the military, was adopted, of course, by a lot of other domains. But today we're talking about a different type of world, which is with the acronym BANI, B-A-N-I, brittle, anxious, nonlinear, and irrational.
Mm.
And what I see is that executives, leaders, Darrell, are trying to understand and manage and lead and control in a world which I don't believe is in a place anymore where it is controllable. Doesn't mean we can't be successful and we can't have tremendous results and impact, but we've got to do it differently.
Mhm.
Today we have an epidemic of stress and anxiety in the workplace. Burnout has become a syndrome. It's a recognized syndrome with the World Health Organization. It
Mhm.
touches more than half people in the American workplace, almost every day. And often what I've seen is the high performers, the people that we all know we can count on. We can need to get something done that's tough. We got the high performers. They're the ones that are most at risk of burnout because they tend to charge ahead. And when things get hard, they tend to push harder and harder and harder. And what I've seen is that some of these wonderful people wind up in a place of terrible burnout. It hits them because they just have been operating in a way which doesn't suit this reality anymore.
One of your quotes in your book, one statistic, it talked off about Gallup's finding that managers account for roughly 70% of the team's performance.
Yes.
Does that literally mean that the managers are doing the work and the workers aren't doing the work?
No, it doesn't mean that the manager is doing the work. What it means is that the impact of the manager on the team is such that if the manager is competent, effective, but mostly, I would say what I talk about in my book is creates a level of coherence on the team is going to perform well. The
Mhm.
challenge today is that managers, especially middle managers, are the ones that are most at risk of burnout because they have a tremendous amount of responsibility without a lot of authority. And I'd say those two realities are a recipe for a very difficult situation. So, yeah, so that Gallup stat really puts an onus on managers to manage their well-being and their
Mhm.
own inner world to be able to better lead their teams.
Mm. So, if I understand correctly, if the managers were more focused, they would be able to get that 70% number to 80, 90%.
I think, well, first of all, certainly the best managers have I'd say a very significant, more significant impact on their teams than others. But the
Hmm.
impact could be positive or it could be negative, and you want that impact to be positive. And
Yes,
so
yes.
what that means is, how does a leader, how does a manager cope with the realities, the complexity of the world that we're facing in the world today? And so the first thing is to understand that they cannot control things the way they used to be able to.
Right.
And I speak a lot about that in my book, which is the illusion of control,
Hmm.
right? The world has become too complex for us to think we can actually control anything, let alone control ourselves. It's become that hard, right?
Right, right.
So what I try to explain to people in the book and in my work is that if you can understand that control is an illusion, that if you really look at how much you've actually been able to control in your life around you, it's actually very little.
Very little.
There was a paper in the 1970s written by a psychologist called Ellen Langer called The Illusion of Control. She was a terrific psychologist who showed that we overestimate the amount of control we have in any domain of our life. Now, it doesn't mean we have impact, but control is different to impact. Control means we want people and events to unfold exactly the way we want it to, because that's how we define success, that's what we need, etc. But things rarely happen in life the way we expect them to. And people really behave in life the way we want them to. So what I found in my work over this last quarter century, and it's gotten harder and harder for people, is that the more we try to control people, especially in organizations, the more we're going to get resistance and the more we're going to decrease performance. What team members and people really need in general is they need connection, they need
Mhm.
trust, they need vision and purpose. They need someone that's going to bring out the best in them. But for a leader or manager to bring out the best in someone else, you have to be able to connect to the best in yourself first and how to manage yourself.
Right.
So there's an internal operating system that you have to become acquainted with in order to to be the best version of yourself. And if you're the best version of yourself, you're naturally going to be the best version of a manager or leader for your team.
One of the points that stuck out at me and had me to self-reflect is that you suggest that we've become addicted to busyness.
Yeah,
Is busyness actually the enemy of great leadership?
that's a really great question, and it's very well put. Yes, I would say it absolutely is the enemy of great leadership. We, I think it's people are starting to recognize this today. There's more and more sort of narrative around, well-being and around balancing work and life and things like that, and which is good. But still, I think people tend to equate, whether it's conscious or unconscious, being very busy with actually making an impact.
Hmm.
And what I've seen in my work is that the majority of leaders and managers are spending an exorbitant amount of time on very low value activities. So they're very, very busy. That makes them feel good. It hits the serotonin receptors in your brain and makes you feel like you're creating value. At least you feel valuable when you're
Right.
doing it.
Right.
But in fact, the old adage is you got to slow down. You got to slow down to go fast. And slowing down means, am I actually focusing on things that matter? Most of the time, we're not. Especially in large organizations, people are wasting up to 30, 40% of the time in meetings that they should not even be a part of. They go, they're invited, they're part of it. People invite them out of politeness because they don't want to, don't want to upset their colleagues. They go out of politeness
Right.
and they sit there wondering, what am I doing in this meeting? Like I'm not this, like I have no bearing on what's going to happen here. I don't know if this meeting's here to make a decision or just to talk through stuff. Most meetings are a waste of time. So, and then there's like getting through your to-do list every day. But the challenge is how many of the things on your to-do list are actually going to create significant value? So we're stuck in this cycle, this reactive cycle of busyness,
Right.
of wanting to feel valuable, of getting a lot done, but at the end of the day, looking back and saying, did I achieve anything truly valuable today for me or for my company?
Right.
In many cases, the answer is no.
Wow. So let's talk about the love framework.
Yeah.
Your subtitle of your book is Practicing L.O.V.E.
Yeah.
in Turbulent Times. Let's
Yeah.
unpack that. Tell us more about that.
Yeah. So, well, let's start with the turbulent times first. It goes back to what I was saying a few minutes ago. We are living in turbulent times.
Yes.
whether it's political, social, economic, you name it, and even
Technical.
technological, right? Yeah, technical. I mean, AI is creating enormous value and enormous turbulence at the same time, right? So we as the human in the middle of all of this have to figure out how are we going to function? How are we going to be impactful? And especially when we lead, we're responsible for other people. So
Yeah.
our impact has more importance than if we're just sort of by ourselves operating alone somewhere. So L.O.V.E is an acronym which brings together what I've found to be four essential pillars for functioning at a high level in these turbulent times. And I can go through them quickly if that works for you.
Please, absolutely.
So the L stands for letting go. And the O for oneness, the V for vision, and the V for energy. And I'll go through with the meaning of each one and why I believe they're so important. So letting go goes back to what we talked about a few minutes ago, which is this illusion of control. When we try to control or over control, we wind up shutting people down, shutting things down. We stress ourselves out, and we try to manage a reality which is unmanageable. And what I talk about in the book is our default mode for most of us, including some of the most effective leaders I've seen, is resisting reality. Things happen, and we put an enormous amount of mental, emotional energy into refusing the reality we're dealing with when it's already happened. And so I liken that to a skipper on a sailboat. If you're out there on the ocean on your sailboat and you hit bad weather, there is no wisdom in arguing with the weather. It is not going to change because you get upset about it. So you have to adjust the sails, adjust your course, and figure out how do you adapt to the circumstances that life is throwing your way, right? The turbulence that's coming out of the weather. So you have to let go of the belief you can control to then access the resources which are in you to be able to deal with what's in front of you. And that's where we shift from reactivity, which is reacting to circumstances, which is not ideal, to be responsibility. And responsibility is the ability to respond with all our resources. So the letting go is that piece of it. Oneness is understanding that we live in a world that's highly interconnected. Everything is interconnected in our world. If you study biology, you know our ecosystem is a fully interdependent ecosystem, how trees talk to each other in the forest, how all animals live in a virtuous cycle of interdependence. But humans are interconnected. We depend on one another. And if you look even at the history of humanity, you see the civilizations that were the most cooperative were the ones that flourished the most. And what we're finding today is that interconnection is even at I'd say a micro level of quantum mechanics. I don't want to get too technical here, but we have the most advanced scientific concepts today to show us that interconnection takes place even at a distance. People are interconnected in their thoughts, in their emotions, in their feelings, and so there's a reality of oneness. And when we understand we're not an isolated fragment operating in a hostile universe, but we're part of a collective that is in this world together and for our purposes as a leader in an organization together. When you understand that you're part of a living, intelligent ecosystem, you operate differently. Your choices are different. You're informed by that sense of oneness, of real connection. Vision is that's the V in L.O.V.E, and the vision is really about understanding that to achieve, we need to know what we want.
Right.
But it's not just enough to know what we want. It needs to be purposeful and meaningful to us and to all the people we work with.
Mm-hmm.
And whether we realize it or not, we're always living into some type of vision. Sometimes it's not conscious, meaning that if we get up in the morning and we're not feeling great and our team is underperforming and we don't feel good about where the organization's heading, we're living into a very negative vision.
Mm-hmm.
And all our energy is going into actually making that vision a reality without realizing it. So vision has to be conscious and has to remain conscious.
Right.
You have to understand that we are, every moment of our day, of our life, of our work, we are creating, whether we realize it or not.
Mm-hmm.
We're speaking to people, we're managing events, we're taking action. And that action ideally is aligned with an inspiring picture of the future and a meaningful purpose behind that picture. And when you're aligned with that, your actions become much more valuable, your happiness goes up, and your performance goes up. And finally, the last piece is energy. There's a lot of research around this. The best leaders are positive energizers. They're people you want to be around.
Right.
They make you feel good in their presence. They genuinely care about you. You want to be around them just because that makes you feel good, but you also perform better because we ultimately, you think about it, as humans, we need energy, right? We need to eat, we need to sleep, we need to, we need to fuel ourselves in the ways we do, but we need psychic energy. Psychic energy is what feeds our minds, our souls, our hearts.
Hmm.
And when you're a leader, you're in a position where you can actually have a massive impact on another human being through the type of energy you're bringing to them. And so those four together, they're not sequential. They're four pillars of a paradigm. When you master them, you rise in very meaningful ways in your ability to be an impactful leader and one that is sustainable as well. So there's obviously a lot more behind that, and there's a lot more in the book, but that's at a very high level.
Thank you so much. That is excellent. And so, believe it or not, we're down to the last few minutes. Time just flies by. This has been very, very inspirational. You have coached thousands of leaders. In your opinion, what separates truly exceptional leaders from merely competent managers?
It's a phenomenal question. So I think it comes down to a few key things. The one thing is presence. And I don't mean stage presence. What I mean is the ability to be present with other human beings,
Hmm.
to be there, to really connect, to really listen, to really see who the person is in front of you, and to be with them in the moment you're interacting. Most relationships, Darrell, in our world are transactional, especially in the working world. People use other people to get to results. We don't want to use other people. We want to work with them, collaborate with them to do something meaningful together for a shared outcome. And when a leader is present with a team member, that leader can then understand what matters to that person, how they can bring out the best in that person, how they can help that person succeed in there, and help elevate, the rising tide raises all boats. But presence is a felt thing. And we know today through science that we can actually pick up through our heart
Mm.
what the other person is emanating as a signal. And so this is really interesting stuff. Our heart gives off electromagnetic signals. We pick them up subliminally, and we feel either good or bad in another person's presence. So the first thing is presence, and the second thing is actually the heart.
Hmm.
And I talk about something in the book, which is I call it the leadership heart set, which is a complement to the mindset. We need the right mindset, but heart is when you put your heart. We all know what it means to put your heart into something or into someone. That's a really it's an absolute truism of life, is that without a heart in anything, life has no meaning, and certainly leadership has no meaning. And leaders that have heart, and I've been fortunate to meet many of them, outstanding, they actually bring the concept of it come out of the word love. It's not a word commonly used in the corporate world, but people will experience it. They may not name it that way, but when they experience that heart from someone who's their superior, that sense of being cared for, that sense of I matter, I have value, and that comes from the heart, it changes everything. It changes lives. I've seen it. I've seen these leaders, Darrell, change countless people's lives, sometimes just in a few minutes, just in one meeting.
Yeah.
A great CEO. I know people like this that they'll meet someone in an elevator, they'll look them in the eye, they'll connect with the heart, they'll say some words which are going to stay with that young person for decades.
Wow.
So I'd say those are the two things:
Beautiful.
presence and heart, and not trying to control. Yeah.
And if there was one message you want to leave with our listeners today, what is that one message about leadership?
Um, Ultimately, leadership is about who you are and not what you do. It's a state of being.
Hmm.
And ultimately, leadership is the transmission of that state from you to the people around you. So if you're cultivating, if you're developing yourself and your inner being to something you feel good about, you're proud of, where you have, you're aligning your mind and your heart and your values and you're present. That's really what it's about. We are human beings, not human doings. You cultivate the being.
Hmm.
That's your greatest leadership asset, in my experience.
And Mark, quickly, we're going to unfortunately have to wrap up.
Yeah.
How can they get in touch with you?
So The easiest way is to write to me at Marc, M-A-R-C, at essential-leadership.com. So essential-leadership.com. That's the best way for them to get in touch with me, Darrell.
Beautiful. Mark, I want to, ladies and gentlemen, we're here with Mr. Marc Inzelstein. He is the author of Essential Leadership, Practicing Love in Turbulent Times. Mark, thank you for coming on the program.
Been a pleasure and a privilege, Darrell. Thank you for having me on.
It's great. That wraps it up for this week on Leadership with Darrell W. Gunter on WSOU 89.5 FM and streaming on the net at WSOU.net. Please join us on any of the podcasts or our YouTube channel. Please subscribe to it. We greatly appreciate it. Before you go, we want you to remember one thing, that leadership begins with you.